The first rule of Incite Club is you don't talk about Incite Club. You do Incite Club. The second rule of Incite Club is the only assumptions we make about one another are that we all want happiness and we all want to avoid suffering. The third rule of Incite Club is you check all your other assumptions at the door. We hope these conversations will bring you insights that incite you to action. Welcome to Incite Club. Hey, welcome back to Incite Club. I was thinking while the intro was playing about our homework from last week, which was, can we be in the space of how can I help instead of how can I be right? And I realized I have a little funny story to share about this. So we had house guests and we were getting ready to sit and watch a movie, and one of my cats brought in a live mouse, and they do this all the time. They bring in live mice and then they want to hunt with us. They're like, oh, this is a fun game. And so as like my husband's trying to figure out how to set up the TV to our guest's computer and like make it all work. There's all this technology stuff happening. The cat comes in with the mouse. And so my husband takes over trying to figure out the mouse, and I take over trying to figure out how to like do the app with my phone and all of the stuff. And this huge amount of embarrassment rose up in me because, oh my God, there's a live mouse in my house and I'm house guests. Like, this is not a great thing. And then I can't figure out how to work my own television. And my first, like where I was first drawn and where I spent a few moments was like, well, I'm just going to be angry. I'm just going to blame the technology. I'm just going to say like, this doesn't work. And then I was like, I don't remember in the moment if the language came of how can I be helpful, but some wiser part of me was like, that's not going to have a great outcome. So I focused on what I was doing. I like worked through that technology block because I get that in the panic moment of this. Oh, I don't know how to work technology. I figured out how to download the app, get the thing, make it talk to the stuff. Grady caught the mouse, got it outside, or he didn't. Like this never happened. So this was like some good magic where he managed to kind of corner the mouse by the front door, open the front door, and it ran out, and then the cat stayed and we closed the door and everything was solved. But it was a cool moment to notice that my first reaction, my instinct, was not to be helpful, was not to try to solve the problem, but because of embarrassment and ego, my first inclination was like, I will just be a hindrance. So that was my experience with being helpful versus being right.
Well, it turned out well, right? It worked.
Did. It did. And then it was like relief of, oh, the chaos is over. And it only lasted a few seconds. Yeah. Did anything come up for you in the last 2 weeks around choosing helpfulness over being right?
Yeah, complicated situation. For me, it was more like some moments where the most helpful thing I could do was just listen and not necessarily share my opinions on it. Not that I haven't shared afterwards, but when I shared, it was from a place of, okay, I actually need to share my backstory, even though I don't like to have to tell everything, especially when I'm going on a tangent because I can't say nothing. When someone shares something with me, I tend not to share with others, and I think everyone should. Not should, but usually we try not to like share what like sensitive information.
Yeah.
But it was something that I felt like actually so that I can be understood why I'm coming from this place. I need to share this background story. And again, like we talked in the first episode, I think risk being seen as crazy. And once more, I felt like, oh, actually, when we allow ourselves to be seen, is not. Some people can understand, so that's a good thing that happened. But yeah, the first thing that I felt that it was helpful was just to listen and let people release what
Yeah.
they had to release, because this is one of the things with being helpful as well. Sometimes we think that to be helpful we need to, and I'm guilty of that, we need to give some answers or like give an advice,
Yeah.
and sometimes that's not a helpful thing. Like getting into other people's stuff is not what's going to help. Is like people sometimes need to like vent as well.
Yeah. Allow. What a gift that is to be with somebody and allow them, which sounds like a basic thing, but I don't think socially we do that often.
Mm.
So somebody's experiencing and would go into fix or I have had this habit and I'm much more conscious of it now, but like the silver lining. Well, but it's okay. At least this is not. And the person's like, oh no, actually that's broken too. You're like, well, but yeah, at least you still have this. And they're like, oh no, sorry. I also got fired from my job. I don't have that to fall back on. So allowing. Well, I really like that expanding of the definition of what's helpful. In my situation, being helpful was taking over a task that I felt intimidated by and taking some action. And in your situation, being helpful was listening, allowing, holding space.
No, this space. I have to talk in a minute. Yeah. Oh.
Yeah, we're giggling about holding space because before we started recording, I was sharing a story with Lise about and apologies because I don't remember the name of the language, and even if I saw it written, I would not be able to pronounce it. But I saw a reel on Instagram recently where a woman was saying, "Hey, this idea of holding space that seems brand new." She's like, in the language that I grew up speaking, uh, forgive and asking for forgiveness really means you're holding space for somebody, like you're giving forth space for that person. And I was just so interested and excited. Like the part of my brain that loves language was really activated, excited. But also, I like this investigation of what it means to forgive. We wanted to talk about forgiveness today because I think it's such a hard to understand, hard to feel concept used to mean a lot of different things. But I'll see if I can find the link to that reel and share it in the description. But just this idea of when you're saying, so she made it very clear. She's like, so if I say to you, please forgive me, what I'm saying is, please, can you hold the space for me that I'm not able to hold for myself? And if I forgive you, I do the same thing. I hold the space for you that you're not able to hold for yourself. And what a beautiful concept that is, because when we are seeking forgiveness, or when we're maybe not even seeking it, but we wish we had it, maybe it feels too scary to seek it. We're in a place where we feel a fault or a failure or, oh no, that's not how I wanted to act. That's not how I wanted to be. And so if the reach out is, I'm really struggling right now to hold the space for myself. Can you please hold it for me? From the very person we may have angered, pissed off, hurt, wronged, whatever it is. Like, holy cow, that I would like to live in that kind of society and social structure.
And what a different view, because uh, it makes total sense. First of all, right? Even if you think of English language, forgive, like you're giving something. That
Yeah.
there's a give in that word, but we're talking before the before hopping on live, and we even said like we should start recording right away because that should be in the call, in the episode. um how this started, forgiveness become, even from probably medieval Catholicism, of thinking of forgiveness as like, for me to forgive you, I have power over you, and
Yeah.
then like you need to pay for your forgiveness.
The indulgences where people would literally pay to have their sins forgiven. Yeah. It's
Yeah,
kind of like carbon credits. I'm going to keep polluting, but I'm just going to pay for it. I just
it
imagine like the
seems like a
nobleman going to the church and he's like, I'm going to have a big weekend. Let me just pay ahead of time.
oh, we're going to piss off a few people.
Yeah.
Ah, well,
Yeah.
if you're pissed off with any of the things that we just said, please forgive us.
And tell us why, because then we can have a conversation and maybe like clarify.
and
Um,
and maybe there's no need to judge or feel like you're someone needs to be wrong in the conversation as well, as we've been talking about. All right. No,
but
I think that,
keep going with that thread, because you were talking about like forgiveness being about somebody having power over.
yeah, because there's this view of like, if I'm asking for forgiveness, then I did something wrong, and if I did something wrong to this person, then this person has the power to over me, and this is why we tend. I feel like the why we tend to fear, even like have resistance towards asking for forgiveness. It's much easier to just cut someone from our lives, or either
Mm.
from an anger standpoint, or feeling like this will never work. I'm not gonna put myself lower than this person, so I'm just gonna cut them out of my life. Or and this can come even from like uh, embarrassment. So like I'm even embarrassed to talk to this person after what I did, even if I would like to be with them again, because I fear the judgment, and I know that the dynamics can become like, now they have power over me, I'm lower,
Yeah.
then it's easier to just not say anything, or to hold um, that superior feeling like, I have nothing to be forgiven. I'm I was right, and that thing of I
Yes.
was right anyway. So
To go
yeah,
overtime into justifying it and create the story and like tell the people in our lives like we're making it more real by like, oh, well, yeah, I mean, maybe I didn't show up and do that thing or I did this, but you wouldn't believe what they'd already done. Yeah.
yeah,
We create reinforcements, like
yeah.
building this wall.
Trying to find the stories and the justifications, like you were saying,
Yeah.
to for what we done that wasn't right anyway.
Yeah. And this, I think, starts internally, right? So even self-forgiveness, this becomes very complicated. If my conception of forgiveness, and this is how I grew up, and I didn't grow up in a religious household at all, but living in America, um, they call it like kind of like the Judeo-Christian
Yeah,
ethos, right? It really does permeate everything. And I would put an asterisk there. Not a deeply spiritual, mystical interpretation of Judaism and Christianity.
yeah.
Not at all. A very sanitized, very
Dogmatic.
like politically infused version of the um the philosophies and stories from the Old and New Testament. Like that's what's
Mm.
permeated American culture. And so I grew up not ever trying to define forgiveness necessarily, but thinking, having this relationship to it, that it was exactly what you're saying. It means I'm wrong, somebody else is right, I'm lower, I did wrong. Um, and this is kind of what we were joking about, but it's very serious. Like the big cultural space of mea culpa, and literally self-flagellation. It still persists today. We think of that as like, oh, that was, the Middle Ages. But that self-punishment. I remember reading The Scarlet Letter in high school and just being so fascinated, but also really relating and resonating to like one of the main characters who's had this relationship with this woman, and he's supposed to be a pillar of the community, and he like is just self-harming. And I related so much to that feeling of, I'm, at a certain point, I'm just so wrong and broken and I deserve to suffer. And there's no way back. There's no way out for me. That felt really real and palpable to me. So if that's my relationship with forgiveness, and it was, how the heck could I even approach something like self-forgiveness? Because that's actually really painful. It means that then within myself, there is a master. And maybe that's why like self-harming made so much sense to me, because I'm like, I need to be punished, but I'm so disgusting that I can't even tell somebody else what I did and be punished by them. So I have to just be my own punisher. There was like a total logic there to
Yeah.
me. And how stunted we are when we cut ourselves off from self-forgiveness.
Mm. And this is one of the things that I found fascinating when they shared about that reel, talking about how forgiveness was the equivalent to holding space, because that's exactly how I feel about um, when I hold space, either for a client or in a circle, especially in a circle, I would say. Uh, it is the kind of space that creates self forgiveness, because we tend to, if I can forgive, and I can not even forgive, like I can hold space. I'm gonna use that word.
Yeah.
If I can hold space for a dear friend or someone even that I just met, but that even maybe did the same thing as I did, but I can see like, oh, I can hold that with compassion. I can see you with compassion, for example, how we did in many circles. I can see that mirror and hold that for myself as well, and see like, ah, okay, I can forgive myself.
Mhm.
If I'm not holding any judgment against Megan, why would I do that for myself?
Yeah.
And the same thing as when we share something that, and I would say even more powerful, maybe when we share something that we feel like I'm probably going to be judged for that because I judge myself for that, and then you have that mirror from your sisters or from your friends or whatever, that like showing that no you're not, we see you, I've been there as well, or even if I haven't been there, I can understand where you're coming from. A lot of healing
Yes.
happens in that space. Like,
Yes. And I feel like there was always, so like when I was in Hot Light Sisterhood and, something would come up that I would share that was like, I'm struggling with this, or I'm feeling so like, not okay about this. And the reflection, a big part of the reflection from the sisters and from you was, well, it's like, this is there's this whole spectrum of Megan, right? And this is like this one moment. But what about all the rest of this? And when I'm in a place of self judgment, it just gets highlighted.
mm,
Something interesting I noticed lately. So last year, I participated in a multi author book called Silence No More. And it was a really powerful healing experience for me. I wrote about some experiences from my young childhood and teenage years that are things that I've talked about, like in safe scenarios, like with coaches and therapists, but certainly wasn't something that I was like sharing broadly. And I was having this thought stream recently and noticing like, oh, certain events in that still feel triggering. Like I just kind of ruminating. And it was like, oh, this happened, that. And certain events felt triggering and certain ones didn't. And the ones that didn't feel triggering are the ones I wrote about in my chapter in the book. Because I released them. I said like, I wrote, if I don't say so myself, I wrote about it in a great way. But I put a lot of intention into telling a story that would be from what I've learned, not like, oh my God, I'm a raw mess of cooked spaghetti and I'm like I'm a dumpster fire. I really was intentional in crafting a story to give it a perspective that was like, this is what I've learned. And it was full of self-love and full of self-forgiveness as well. And acknowledging like, oh, as a kid, this was what I thought. This was the truth I came away with. And now as an adult, here's what I actually see. So it was just so cool to notice that I could feel the events in my timeline where I'd coded them in self-forgiveness and in removing the shame by sharing them. And then there were still these other events where I'm like, oh, I haven't coded that in self-forgiveness yet. And I can feel a palpable difference. So this shit works.
Yeah. And may I say that, yes, you wrote in a beautiful way, and
Thank you.
it's healing for anyone who reads that. And even for anyone who just wants something very good, a very good story to read, that's a great story to read as well.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah. So how do we get into a different place around forgiveness? For me, it happened magically. I don't know how I could like replicate this.
That's true. And I'm not gonna say that. It's interesting because you mentioned the fact that uh, it can be hard to ask for forgiveness to the very person you did, like ask for the space to the very person you did wrong.
Yeah. Like,
Uh,
hey, I know I already just hurt your feelings massively. Now, can you help me out?
yeah, it can be pretty complicated. Um, I feel like that's one of the big things that, at least for me, made me shut down on even asking for forgiveness at times, because of like asking for forgiveness and then hearing the whole story again, like of everything that I did wrong.
Oh, yes.
So maybe, and this isn't. I wish I could say just do it, but I know that sometimes we're already so hurt that that just reinforces more of the wrong.
Well,
For people who can have like someone safe that is not the person who did you wrong, or that you did wrong, to share first might be a good start.
yeah. And you're inspiring me because it doesn't even have to involve the other person. And that's really what forgiveness is about. Right. And so before we started, we were talking about the ho no. I'll get the wrong number of syllables every time.
I don't
Yeah.
know how to
The,
correct
the
that.
prayer, uh, thank you, I'm sorry, please forgive me, I love you. I may be getting the order wrong. And the intention is you're just in that space with yourself and you can put that energy toward a specific person, um, where you want their forgiveness. And it's very powerful. It's hilarious. I was talking to somebody like a year or so back, and who'd been very wronged. Like somebody in her life had wronged her really severely. And she was like, oh, I just found out about the no prayer. It's like banana, little kids. I know how to spell banana. I just don't know when to stop.
No, no,
But
no, no.
yeah, she was like, oh, I just learned about this and it's great. And I was like, oh, I'm so happy for you. That's wonderful. And she's like, yeah, so I keep calling up this person and leaving voicemails and saying, and I'm like, oh, that's not really how it works. You're not supposed to say it directly to them. And it was so interesting because that's, of course, that's what you would think, because we're all steeped in this like forgiveness is like, oh, I forgive you. I have the power. And she wasn't doing it in that place, right? But we're taught that like I'll be the bigger person, right?
Yeah.
I'll forgive you. And I just was really struck by that. I was like, oh, that's not how I was taught you use that. I was taught it's a prayer and it's a space you occupy. And maybe it doesn't have to be, maybe it can work in another way. But I think it's a beautiful stepping stone, so that we can be in like self grace. Um,
Yeah.
and it's interesting because I'm sorry and please forgive me are both in it. And those do have a different feel. And my journey of saying, I had a different like kind of revelation around forgiveness. But my journey around I'm sorry was what really changed things for me in my life. And it wasn't please forgive me. I didn't even get that far. But I started and I was working with like a wonderful somatic experiencing therapist at the time. And this came up as like one of the things. She's like, this will really help you. So you get into this anger, Megan, and then you get into the guilt around being angry. So just when you're calm, not in the moment, but when you're calm, come back and simply, in a heartfelt way, say, I'm sorry. And it doesn't have to have any explanation. In fact, don't, no other language, no, I'm sorry. There's no but, right? There's no, but I was frustrated. It's just, I'm sorry. And then sometimes it would grow into, I'm sorry. You don't deserve to be treated that way. I'm sorry. I was out of line. And this radically changed my relationship with my husband. Radically. And allowed us to you know, grow beautifully together and have opportunities to talk about like, well, why do we keep getting into this challenge, this conflict? Reading Eckhart Tolle was really powerful because we had a shared language then. And I started saying, like, oh my God, my pain body's activated. I'll go in the other room. See you later. Before it got to the point of like, getting into that moment of what would make me say I'm sorry. So that I like that's a neat titration too. If instead of please forgive me, which can bring up like, oh, let's hash out the thing you did, just I'm sorry.
Mhm.
And it gave me an opportunity for self-forgiveness because then I felt like less of a shitty person. Like, wow, I exploded in anger. And then I owned it and said, I'm sorry. And then that changed how I thought about myself. Wow, I'm not the person who just keeps doing the same, uh, exploding mean thing again and again and then expects to get off scot free. I'm the person who says, I'm sorry. It started changing my identity.
Hmm. Actually, thinking of, we're often talking about language. Think about language. I'm sorry is a more empowering thing to say as well because it's you that's like, I'm sorry. I'm not asking the other person to forgive me, right? So it's a great start.
Yeah.
And coming back to the forgiveness, we were talking about asking other people for forgiveness, and uh, we touched on forgiving ourselves as well. But you mentioned the Ho'oponopono prayer. The Ho'oponopono prayer, I feel like it's a good start for forgiving others, but forgiving ourselves as well. Because, like I said, it is something to do with ourselves. It is something to learn to forgive others that done wrong for us as well. And I remember when I heard that for the first time, feeling like, how can I say, why should I say I'm sorry to someone who did me wrong? They need to say I'm sorry, and probably other people thought that as well. But this is a big thing that probably you heard already, and I heard as well, and I feel like it's the biggest truth. Forgiveness is for ourselves, and especially when we think, like we're saying, that is holding space. Even when we're forgiving other people, we're still holding space for ourselves in that situation.
Yeah.
So, because if we hold the judgment, the grudge, the resentment, it it's just making, like, causing bad to ourselves. We're holding on to a thought or and a feeling that is creating more harm and perpetuating the thing that could just be like gone. It happened. We don't have to focus on that anymore. Like it's past, right?
Because especially we do it a lot. We hold on to things where like that person may not even be in our world anymore. It's not a matter of like, oh, I got to see you in the kitchen in 5 minutes. And I'm not, I had this experience, and maybe it was because I'd been doing the whole Ho'oponopono prayer, um, and working on forgiveness in other ways. But I remember so distinctly, I just in a moment, uh, had this spontaneous release, forgiveness of somebody who'd been out of my life for years. And just in that moment, I went with great clarity. I went, I'm holding on to this hurt. I'm holding on to this weight. I choose for this to be light. And it was like something evaporating from my being. I don't
Mm.
know why I was thinking about that person in that moment. I don't know what shifted again, maybe because I was just doing the forgiveness practice. So then something that was ready to be forgiven arose. But I'd always heard and never believed forgiveness is for us, not for the other person. And in that moment, I went, oh, what a beautiful thing not to hold that as heavy. And now I can think about this person and think about like all the wonderful aspects and like how, I was also like not very enlightened and informed, um uh just kind of more of like, oh well, that was unfortunate that we
Mm.
clashed in that way. And also like there's room for all the fond memories now. Those don't have to be restricted and held back, because it doesn't trigger, like I'm not triggered anymore by those thoughts and memories. And I'm like, oh wow, I'd like to have that for, I've got a list now. I'm like, okay, I also need that for these situations in life and these people. I need that forgiveness. And that's a good reminder. I'm not actively, there was a time when I was actively doing the whole Ho'oponopono regularly, and
Yeah.
I stopped. I don't know, just because things go out of focus, right? Something else comes into greater focus. But maybe that's a good thing to add back in to my
Mm.
daily practice.
Yeah. Mm. I love hearing that you felt that release because I was even thinking as you were saying, like sometimes people even hold uh, resentment and can't forgive people who died already, who left. So of course it's for us and not for them. Like we would even feel like someone who's not even in this world anymore is going to be affected by
Yeah.
well, maybe they do, I don't know, but like what good can it do to hold resentment towards someone who's not even present anymore?
Yeah. Well, and I think also it highlights that it isn't necessary for somebody else to change or ask for forgiveness in order for us to have the relief of forgiving. That's like somebody who's passed and we're still holding the grudge, or we've forgiven, is a really clear um, demonstration that we get to choose whether we're holding that, we get to choose what kind of energy we're holding toward that person, because they're not changing anything in the relationship at that point.
And that we don't, the other person doesn't even need to acknowledge that they they need forgiveness or they need to uh yeah, for us
Yeah.
to release that.
There doesn't even have to be an I'm sorry. There doesn't have to be any kind of um, moment of like satisfaction of, like the egoic satisfaction of, oh yeah, you're admitting you're wrong and I was right.
That's the power struggle that we were talking in the beginning.
Yep.
And it's interesting because I understand some people might listen to this and feel like, but I need closure.
Oh,
uh,
yeah.
and that's totally understandable.
Yeah.
Uh,
But closure only ever comes from within. Like, we don't wanna hear this, but closure can only ever come from within because somebody could come to you and I've had this experience too. This was wild. I had somebody, like, I hadn't heard from in years that I knew in high school, like, randomly pop up on Facebook and say, "I am so sorry I hurt you when we were teenagers in high school." And I was like, "Oh my god, this is amazing. This doesn't ever happen." I was like, "Thank you. Wow, that's amazing. How are you? What's happening in your life?" And, like, it was it was such a gift. But uh oh, I just lost my train of thought. Mhm, mhm.
you couldn't remember that they hurt you?
Oh, somebody, like, somebody might come with the most heartfelt apology, and we still wouldn't get closure if we weren't ready to open
Mm,
our hearts to receive it. That's the
yes.
point I wanted to make, right? So, he might have shown up and said, like, "Oh, I'm so sorry," and I would have been like, "Well, this is not good enough, get a time machine and change the past." Like, so that to me is really great evidence that closure only can come from inside, and it doesn't necessarily feel like it.
Yeah.
um but and that, like, that's not to say that because it comes from inside you should be able to do it at any moment. It's just that when it's the right time and when we're healed enough to look at the situation and not be triggered by it for whatever reason, because we've done some, like, growth of our spirit and we feel supported, or maybe it's because we're in a community that really sees us, we're being resourced, whatever is leading us to that. When we're ready, it's our internal motion that will make it happen. And if somebody says it to us externally, it's like, oh, well, that's kind of icing on the cake, but
Yes.
didn't even didn't even need that or know that was an opportunity.
I'm taking note of this because
Yeah.
I feel like uh, you touch on a big point, just like we were talking about uh, forgiveness coming being for us.
Yeah.
Uh, Closure coming from inside is a big one as well.
Hmm.
And even deciding if we're as we were talking about how these relationships continue or not as well.
Yeah.
This is part of closure.
Yeah. I really admire when somebody makes an end to a relationship. Sometimes it's a romantic partner, but sometimes it's a parent even. I really admire when somebody makes an end to a relationship from this place of conscious self-love, without ire, without that I'm right kind of feeling. I look at that in awe and go, "Whoa," because it's in the same way you might go, it's really not working for my body to eat meat, and I'm not going to eat meat anymore. Or the city I'm living in doesn't feel supportive, and I'm going to go move and be by the trees or be by the water or something. Like, it's just oh, I know I'm making this decision that is really going to be the best for me. you know
Yeah.
like, that's spiritual enlightenment, baby.
Uh, yeah, the decision coming from a place where there's no need to be like an outrage or an anger or just because you're listening to yourself.
Yeah.
That's a big thing.
Yeah. To be able to make a clean break. I don't feel that. I know there are some people in my life I no longer have relationships with, but I still have relationships with them. I still got those cords going. I'm like, dear God, please give me the enlightenment to forgive myself enough to forgive the other person eventually. But not yet. I'm like St. Augustine. Give me
And
that alignment, but not yet, because I'm still enjoying being angry about this.
and there's that as well, like not even just making the decision to end the relationship from a peaceful place, but also to shift relationships, like we probably can talk about this some other time if we have some common friends that have reinvited people in their lives and like
Yes.
in a shifted way. But it comes from a place of not just, okay, I accept you and you can keep doing whatever shit you did in the past, but from a place of we're gonna have an adult relationship from where we are now and not bringing the past back. This is
Hmm.
powerful too. This is also forgiving who we were in the past and who the other person were in the past, and acknowledging the how far we've come.
Yeah. Oh. My real big insight is, kind of what we started with, this idea of forgiveness is holding space. And that leads me to wonder, maybe an interesting, like, incitement for the next couple weeks would be practicing holding space for ourselves. Like, maybe when we get that voice that's like, oh, I'm such an idiot, why did I do that? um and just practicing discerning between, because this is really important, discerning between I love myself and, oh, that is not how I want to act.
Mm.
One of the positive things about the Judeo-Christian total infiltration of American culture is this phrase that's real common: hate the sin, not the sinner.
Mm.
Right? And this idea of, you know, what should be the case is there's a recognition, like, we're all light and we're all love, right? And then there
Mm.
are actions that we take and choices we make where we're like, oh, that was not me acting in accordance with my highest self or with love. Um, so I would like to practice that in these coming weeks, listening for the voice that's like, oh, I'm crap at this, or I messed up, or whatever it is, and just pause to go, yes, and I still love myself.
Oh, I was going to say my biggest insight was about the closure being from the inside,
Yeah.
but now what you just said actually, I feel like this was even a bigger insight. Like thinking of hating the sin, not the sinner, and at the same time, uh, n- loving ourselves enough to not allow that to be in our field if it's going to cause us harm.
That's the so important thing, because that's the place from which we actually make change. That's why my whole life changed when I started saying I'm sorry. Because before I started saying I'm sorry, I was like, I'm such a shitty partner. How can I be like, I'm such a terrible partner? How, oh my gosh, how can this man like put up with me like flying into these rages? And I don't change. There may be other people who do, but most people I talk to change when they feel a sense of hope, like a sense of self-love. I'm firmly convinced that, like, the changes, the good changes we make, right? When we're moving toward our greatest potential, it's because we have some kind of base level belief in ourselves, right?
Yeah.
So in order to make those better choices, so I don't again find myself in like, oh my God, that's not how I want to be acting, beating myself up in that moment, I know will lead me back into behaviors that I don't want to be doing because I feel so crummy. I feel like the person who says, well, I was going to not eat sugar, but I ate that like one bite of cake. So now I may as well eat the whole cake. Right? It's
Yeah.
all or nothing. Like, I messed up. So that means I'm a bad person. So who cares? I may as well just not try.
And when we think of all the resonance and how uh, energy affects us and how like the projection affects us as well, um, we change more by being held and loved, by being forgiven, right? Going back to the
Mm.
forgiveness, than by punishment. There's
Mm.
a reason all the movies about uh, anti-heroes, like the villains that we've been seeing, there's an element of like the villain being severely punished and being like rebelling on that. I feel like the if we are so like judgmental towards ourselves and we uh, are punished over and over, uh, there's an element of human beings feeling like if I'm bad anyway, then I'm better be the best as being at being bad.
Yeah.
So it's a wrong reinforcement. Uh,
Yes.
it's not gonna bring a change, but um, forgiveness and love do change.
So this really comes back to that question from last time. What's the most helpful thing I can do in this situation? Right? What's the thing that's actually going to get the kind of positive results I want? And that is so counter to this, I'll call it the corrupted Judeo Christian culture that I know I'm immersed in my country. Because really, when you like get into those religions and get into those texts, right, it's like, no, you guys missed a very important part, right? But that corrupted sensibility is, oh, this what's one of the greatest lines from the movie The Ref. There's a burglar, and the kid says, "Well, maybe they'll catch him and let him go in the spirit of Christmas because it's Christmas Eve." And the mom, played so brilliantly by Christine Baranski, says, "That's not the spirit of Christmas. The spirit of Christmas is you're good and you get presents, or you're bad and you go to hell." It's like that's so this idea that we need to punish people because there's like this feeling of punishment is right, like some things are bad and you have to punish. um if we would look at the results we actually get when we have that operating system, if we would be honest about whether punishment gets us the results we want, we would stop doing it.
Yeah.
We would stop doing it, but we persist in, and like the judicial system and the like incarceration, the way it looks in my country is such an example of this, that punishing people only leads to people feeling worse about themselves and like falling into lower vibrations. You do not see examples of people being punished and going, now I am fulfilling my potential. So it happens like on a large scale. It happens on an individual scale. I'm pretty passionate about punishment being an outmoded, outdated concept, really.
Mm. That might be something for us to talk even in another episode as well. But I do feel like there's something that we touched in here as well with we talked a lot about fine lines, and I feel like the fine line with this as well is like we're saying, like holding that boundary that this is not okay and I'm not gonna tolerate that,
Yeah.
but at the same time with love and not with uh, punishment.
Yeah. Well, if you look at the way people train a puppy,
Yeah.
right? And like it turns out what's actually the most effective is to create a loving bond, and then the dog will do whatever you ask it to. And this idea of you rub a dog's nose, like it pees on the floor and then you rub its nose in it, right? Like, look what you did, you're wrong. Totally ineffective for potty training, but still done because we have this sense like you need to feel bad about what you did. Well, that feeling bad, the remorse we have when we hurt somebody, yes, we need to feel it. And it's like this really delicate space and you feel it, and then you immediately can take it too far from remorse. Like basically, if you are putting somebody in that, like rubbing their nose in it, you're taking them out of remorse. You're not giving them a chance to feel how sad it does feel to hurt somebody, because that's how we're wired, right? Human beings are wired socially to go like, oh, I hurt you and I see the hurt in your face and that feels really bad. And as soon, if we could have space, if somebody could hold space for us to occupy that moment of self-realization of like, oh, this doesn't feel good, then we could grow. But if they shift us into, and so you're bad and you're a bad person and you should feel bad, what immediately comes up? Maybe it's defensiveness. Maybe it's, oh, I am so bad, so I'll just kind of like curl up in this hole and be bad. But we're missing that sweet spot.
Yeah. And most people don't like hurting other people. We need to hold that grace as well, that most people are do wrong trying to do right.
Yeah, yeah.
Because we're not perfect. And if
Yeah.
we can hold that grace, then things can be easier as well.
I'm writing down this phrase, I love myself enough to act better or to do better, right? And this
Yeah.
notion of like what you were saying, I don't want to be in this way I was being, and I love myself enough to make a better choice. That feels really powerful.
I like that.
All
So
right.
what's the homework for today?
Well, I'm the homework I'm giving myself is to listen for those moments when I'm beating myself up because I have done something that I don't like, or maybe I haven't, right? Maybe it's an error of omission where I'm like, oh, I said I was going to do that. I didn't do it. In the moment to say, I love myself enough to choose better.
Hmm.
What about
Yes.
you?
I like that one. I'm going to take that.
Okay.
Giving the grace and loving myself enough to choose better.
Because it's the love and also the recognition right in the moment of, yeah, let's
That's a good one.
do something different.
Yeah. Mm.
Beautiful.
All right. So we're going to leave you with that. Thank you so much for joining us. And until next time,
See you in 2 weeks.
see you in 2 weeks. Bye.